Chapter 451. Undercover Arrival. The next few days were a blur of trips around town with the trolls, repairing farms, fixing crops, and ensuring that everyone had intact food storage, while helping the new arrivals from just before the battle settle in. There wasn't an idle hand in town, and even Pops had relented and hired an extra worker to do sales and cleaning in the front, so that me didn't get pulled from essential work to do it for him. They were too busy for that. Dominic had managed to find the time to finish the clubs for the trolls, but now that they had all their equipment, they were all dedicated to helping around town, with only 5 trolls at a time working the walls. Security was on everyone's mind, but the manor was far enough inside the town that it was a lower-level concern than the other houses. "Are you off to fix gardens again?" Prince Fahad asked as Dominic prepared to leave the manor after lunch. "Not quite. We've got a few things in the industrial section to check out. The merchants have a caravan in town and they want to talk to me," he replied. Fahad nodded. "I heard that they're sending workers for the airship docks. That's be a great benefit to town, once airborne shipments start to arrive. I didn't expect things to move this fast, but it looks like the actual shipments will be ready before the final details of the trade negotiations are." Dominic laughed at the prince's annoyed tone. "Well, we have to do something to keep them motivated to do more than drink and enjoy Beth's cooking. Have you gotten any word from the mages about the refugees headed this way? I heard from the border patrol that they had already crossed, but they were moving fast, and we don't know if there are mages among them, or just more trolls. I swear, there won't be a single one left in Axbridge at this rate." Dominic shrugged. They didn't mention anything about excessive numbers of mages. But they also didn't mention a lot of trolls. "I will have to go talk to the village chief to see how many more he has received. They're mostly going to that village directly, and he kept most of the swamp trolls that came with the last attack. Their numbers are growing nearly as fast as Wistovers are, and they're going to be a proper town soon. Even if I'm doing most of their trading for them, other than at the market. That market really is a wonder, you know? Every day, I get more messages about the droughts and crop failures at home, pushing me to find a way to solve them. But here, there is so much food that they don't even know how to store it all. If we can get airship transports full of stable goods, which aren't going to get bogged down in the bad weather, we can keep entire cities fed." Fahad insisted. "I think that you should come with me today. There are people that you should meet." Dominic agreed. Intrigued, the prince followed him and the trolls across town to the warehouse, where the Merchants' Guild was welcoming a caravan. There were also a pair of mages from the Duskblade sect there, but that was fairly normal, as the guild supplied them with a wide variety of materials for the school. Your Grace, welcome. We've got your shipment," the merchant began, with a glance at Prince Fahad. "I've brought him to meet them," Dominic explained, and the merchant nodded, then led the group of dwarves out of the back room. Fahad gave Dominic a confused look and waited to see why this would interest him. "Your Highness, these lovely gentlemen are our new Magitech engineers to work on the airship improvement project. They will be trying to improve the speed, cargo capacity, and efficiency of the airships that we are using to move cargo. There are some considerations that have come up in the past about using storage magic, so the plan is to make faster cargo vessels with the ability to move larger payloads. That will make up for it, without the security risk of an integrated storage spell. Whether they still load it with storage bags full of bulk goods is up to them, but for both industrial and military use, these should be far superior to the previous generation." The dwarves nodded in agreement. "Prince Duke, it's a pleasure to make your acquaintance. We have blueprints ready to start, and our lead Magitech engineer has experience making orbs to improve metal quality, so we can make lighter and more durable hulls. However, I am told that the Duke also has some blueprints and skills of his own for the project." Dominic smiled. "I got a blueprint for a bypass turbine that might work well on airships. It's got a greater air movement rate than a traditional propeller for the same mana cost." The dwarf smiled. "Now we're talking. Combine that with a lightened structure, levitation magic, and an upgraded hull design, and I think that we can really do something special." Fahad patted the dwarf on the shoulder. "Axbridge will be counting on you. We need the cargo capacity to get goods to our cities. It's been a rough year, and even with storage bags, it's not easy to move tons of potatoes." The merchants laughed. That was one of the greatest issues of their time. Storage bags had limited space and weight. But bulk food was incredibly heavy. Even if they wanted to compress their shipment to just one wagon, it would take 1,000 shipments to pay for the bags they needed to remove the other 6 or 8 wagons worth of food storage. So, airships for everything is the plan? Fahad asked. I suggested a train line as well, but we would need to run a lot of new track. Castle City doesn't have rail service. The King of Signia has been resistant to adding new track. He thinks they're just more restrictive roads. The merchant sighed. You can't win them all. Chapter 452. For the Dwarves. The dwarf who Dominic assumed was the spokesman for the group stroked his beard and smiled. Well, if we want to work on Magitech trains after we finish with the airships, I don't mind. We've been working on new carriages for ages, and a steam locomotive isn't all that different from a good steam tractor. Fahad nodded. It's all about the infrastructure. We're still working on getting good roads everywhere. Building dedicated railroads is likely to be put off until that is sorted out. Even if it would be more practical, since the only ones who use some of the routes are merchants. The merchant nodded. It has come up, but the kings feel that giving dedicated routes to the guild, which require vehicles that cannot leave the tracks or overtake other vehicles that might be using the route, is not advisable. Put that way, it made sense. It was a lot of land to give to the Merchants Guild. But more than that, it solidified their right to exclusive transport rights over any other independent merchants who wanted to move goods in a region. That was a problem on many levels. Not just because of the lack of competition, but from the chance of sabotage by other merchants and even nobles who didn't have a good relationship with the guild. And it wouldn't necessarily be unprovoked. Once they had control of a route, the guild was known to raise prices, extracting as much profit as they could while they held a monopoly. That was normal for any businessman, but it wasn't the sort of behavior that could encourage a king to give them more power. So, until a kingdom decided that it needed a national railroad system of their own, it was unlikely to become a reality. A shame from a logistical standpoint, but utterly practical from a political one. How much do you think that you can improve the airships by? Prince Fahad asked, hoping to get some solid details out of the newly arrived techno-wizards. We should be able to make a doubling of the cargo capacity a reality, but we will have to study the design for the new turbine to see whether it would be worth it. The major issue is structural integrity, you see. The airship frames are lightweight, but they won't hold up to high-speed travel. It's too much for them. They also have a large amount of wind resistance, which increases drastically with speed. However, even a 20 to 30% increase in speed would be worth the switch, assuming that the turbines are appropriate. Simplicity is king in long-distance travel, after all. However, with so many mages in one spot, we can certainly come up with something that will help. That was the same conclusion that Pops had come up with when Dominic first got the turbine plan. It was too complex for most shipyards to deal with, unless they had specialized training. Prince Fahad smiled. This is wonderful news. I didn't expect that the team would be intending to improve airships, and not just make them to improve availability. If that project is a success, the Kingdom of Axbridge might be willing to purchase at least 10 of them from you in the new design. Now we're talking. Airships are good money. I'm sure that you understand the restrictions we might encounter if you ask us to load them with cannons, though. That's a whole other negotiation. Dominic agreed. The dwarves silently celebrated. They hadn't even started work on the new design, and they already had leads on royal customers. Let's get you to the shop so that the caravan can finish their reloading procedures. I'm sure that you're all interested in seeing your new workshop, and it's got residences built into it, or you can stay in town and walk out in the morning. I was warned that it was dwarves coming, so the dorms are near the forge. Dominic joked. The techno-wizard who spoke for the group smiled. I heard that you're a dwarf's apprentice as well. Dominic nodded. Journeyman now. Pops has taken a new apprentice since he arrived here in Westover. The master from Signia City? Now, that's a bit of good luck on our part. We'll be able to get all the tools we need without having to explain what they are. They definitely knew Pops. We can certainly arrange for tools to be made if there's something that you can't make for yourself. I suspect that you can make most of the tools that you need for your work, but for the tools that you need to make the tools for airship manufacturing, those he should be able to provide quickly. The dwarves smiled. I knew that Westover wouldn't let us down. The whole group left for the new factory, while the dwarves resisted the urge to ask about the group of trolls that had followed them through town. They were obviously Dominic's guards, but they were armored as if he were in the middle of a siege and expecting an imminent breach of the walls. The non-existent town walls. But really, Dave just loved his armor and didn't want to go anywhere in just his uniform now that he had it. The uniform was still fully intact underneath, so in the minds of the trolls, it was the best of both worlds. Plus, they got 2 name tags. Gentlemen, welcome to your new home. We will start here with the main construction area, where we've equipped the floor with multiple overhead cranes, as well as a boom and platform system for moving workers around the envelope of the airship as the construction is completed. That should allow you to build much larger sections for efficiency and lift them into place. Now, the real trick will be in the magic and making it all work together with enough efficiency that we can actually sell these to the average merchant guild officer, without requiring them to hire techno-wizards just to fly. Dominic began. And then the dwarves were off, still listening, but spreading out to see what the building had to offer, without waiting for the tour. I don't think that they're going to say no to the job offer, that's for sure. Prince Fahad joked. Wouldn't that be awkward? Bring them all the way here, and then find out that they don't want the job. But there was no chance of that. They were shouting at each other about features they had uncovered, and the excitement was real. Dominic could only wait until they saw the marvel that was the hydraulic doors, which would allow the whole end of the building to open and let out the completed work. Chapter 453. Plain Rude. Dominic heard a commotion outside the warehouse as the dwarves were finishing their inspection and rushed out to see what was happening. A group of travelers had arrived near the outlying farms, and they appeared to be celebrating their arrival at Westover with fireworks, which had obviously panicked the sheep, which panicked the trolls, which panicked the new arrivals. Dominic ran outside to start calming everything down and put himself between the trolls trying to keep the sheep calm and the new arrivals. What are you idiots doing? Fireworks panic the livestock, he shouted. And who might you be? One of the men asked. I am the Duke Westover. Welcome to the city of Westover. Now kindly stop scaring the livestock. The man didn't seem to know how to respond to that. Instead, they were more concerned that the trolls had started to pay attention to them now that the sheep were calming down. What sort of respectable city would allow trolls to have weapons? The man demanded, startling Dominic and Prince Fahad, who had come out to watch the show. Westover, obviously. The city is majority demi-human, and we've got trolls on the guard force. Is that a problem for you? Dominic asked. Isn't there supposed to be a new Signia city near here? We heard that there were opportunities to build up a new territory from nothing. The man asked. You're right where you thought that you were. This is Signia's newest duchy. But you seem to have been misled about what was going on here. If you're looking for an all-human enclave, I would suggest that you turn northwest and head toward Kynwyn, in Dago's territory. Why the hell would we do that? We came from that direction, and people are starving all the way to Limpsbury. In that case, I suggest you check your attitude at the door. I have no problem running off Dago's loyalists who are going to be a problem for my people. Dominic retorted. A few of the others grabbed the man and dragged him back before he could speak any more. Lord Westover, please don't take his words to heart. There has been a misunderstanding of some sort here. We're not here to cause trouble. Our hometown was overrun with monsters when Skipple was invaded, and we've been looking for a safe spot to settle since. Please, do you have settlement permits to work farms and form a town? An older man asked. Dominic nodded. I am the Duke Westover, and I have the authority to permit settlement within my territory. I am just a bit concerned that you might not be a good fit. If you can't accept that most of the region is not purely human and that there is a lot of magic in use, it might be best to keep moving and try for somewhere in the more settled regions. The old man smiled, and a small flame formed in his hand. We have no problem with magic, Your Grace. Most of our people can use at least a little. There was a traditional academy in town before we were attacked. Dominic sighed. Dave, send one runner to go get Baron Keith. I think that he might be a good choice for these travelers. Baron Keith is a more traditional Signia Baron under my authority. Settling around his barony house might be more comfortable for you, and it's only a few kilometers from here. There are good fields available, though no proper town. However, I will leave the decision to him. If he thinks that there will be problems, I will have him give you a letter of reference to get you through the gates of Castle City. They're still looking for plenty of mages to help with the rebuilding after the siege. The group looked unsure what to do now. They were not happy with the man who had insulted the Duke, but many also held his view on non-humans. They would have preferred to have things back to how they were at home, with just human mages and commoners around. But that seemed unlikely to happen, and their guess was that Signia was deliberately concentrating non-humans and mages in the old Wavemates territories. So, they could take the offer to go to Castle City, or they could take their chances on this place and starting over with nothing. Both might be options, even if they had gotten off on the wrong foot with the Duke. But how were they to know that setting off some celebratory fireworks would cause such chaos? The kids were just happy to have arrived somewhere safe, where they could stop running. Only, they found that there were monsters here too. Just somewhat civilized ones. And the Duke was one of them. That was not going to be easy for many of their people to accept. However, there was a group among them who was not so upset about that. The ones whose families had been hiding a bit of sorceress lineage for generations, and saw the chance to actually settle here where it was clear that the local nobles would not give a damn that they weren't perfectly human. The Duke didn't even try to file down his horns or wear a hat. If there was anywhere that they could live and be themselves, free of the judgment of the humans without magic, this was the place. They pulled the others together for a discussion while they waited for the Baron to arrive, and Prince Fahad nudged Dominic before whispering to him. Are you sure that it's wise to let them stay at all? Skipple is known to be much better about demi-humans than Dagos, even if they do embrace human magic users. Dominic shrugged. I think that the group is going to split. After seeing me and learning the truth of Westover, I think most of them are going to leave. But if they think that they can behave, I will let the Baron take them in. He's not new to the game, and he knows how to keep the commoners in line. Plus, he can blame me if he has to take harsh actions against them. Chapter 454. Big Block. Baron Keith arrived with a handful of his own guards and Dave much more quickly than Dominic had been expecting. He must have seen the troll coming and prepared to head out to a meeting of some sort, as he was fully dressed for a formal situation, as a baron should be. Meanwhile, both Dominic and Prince Fahad were dressed to show noble status, but much more casually. Your Grace, Your Highness. Dave tells me that you require my presence. The Baron announced as he rode over on a mechanical horse. Wonderful timing. We've got a group of new arrivals here who seem to be struggling to accept the nature of Westover Duchy. You're an enlightened and experienced man, so I thought that you might have some insight into how best to handle this. Dominic explained, loud enough that the new arrivals would hear him. Baron Keith examined the group and listened for a moment as they argued about whether to stay or keep going. I see your dilemma. You do hate to give up the chance to obtain more population for the new duchy, but some are just a better fit in a different city. I think that they should be given the individual option. Don't accept the whole group as a group, with a yes or no option. Let me sort them all individually like Castle City and any other major center would. Your way of taking whole groups is the outlier. Most don't hesitate even to break up families if one member is undesirable or cannot meet their criteria. Baron Keith suggested. That was the same thing that the travelers had been thinking once they realized that there was going to be a difference of opinion that they were unable to resolve on their own. The only option they had was to see who wanted to stay and who would be allowed to stay if they asked. While Dominic hadn't mentioned anything to the Baron about them insulting him when they first arrived, or the trouble with the premature celebration among some of their rowdier members, it wasn't impossible that the troll had told him on the way over. Slowly, the group began to split, with the vast majority picking up their supplies and giving the smaller group disgusted looks. The leader of the smaller group was a young woman who had a skittish demeanor, almost like a deer that had smelled predators. But for some reason, they had nominated her to speak for them. Your Grace, we would like to petition to stay within your lands. The others, they would like to carry on with your blessing. They would prefer to go to Castle City or another region of Signia. She began. Her voice was shy and gentle, but Dominic noticed that all the other men seemed to be at least mildly entranced, except Dave. There was magic in her voice, and now he understood why she had been chosen, despite the fact that she was clearly terrified of public speaking. Baron Keith was about to respond, but Dominic stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. There was no telling what the Baron would agree to. I agree that is the best way forward. Why don't we let the Baron here sort everyone out while you come with me? I would like to recommend a particular career to you. Only when he finished did Dominic realize that he had phrased that in the worst possible way. Baron Keith looked shocked, while Prince Fahad was trying not to laugh, and Dave was wiggling his eyebrows. Damn it, not like that. I think that she would be good as one of Princess Alexis' maids. Oh. The veiled maids would be a wonderful job for her. Dave realized. With her magic voice, she could whisper suggestions to men freely, and everyone would assume that she was just passing on the princess orders. Alexis could use her to get things done in a sneaky way. The troll approved. Baron Keith seemed to snap out of his trance a few seconds later, after Dominic had reminded him that he had work to do. Yes, that will work out well. Are the majorities set on Castle City? Or would you like me to give you a reference for somewhere further, but with less damage from the recent attacks? The Baron asked. The larger group's leaders conferred for only a few seconds, then smiled. My lord, if you would be willing to give us a referral to somewhere stable and safe, we would be greatly in your debt. In that case, I will recommend you to Biverlow. The Count is a good friend of mine, and the city is 250,000, with much arable land further out, and a good saltwater port. It has everything that you might require, and if it's not suitable, you can catch a boat from there to anywhere else in the world. Baron Keith explained. That was quite away from here, in southeastern Signia. But if he said it was a good spot, they would happily accept it. The Baron took out a sheet of paper, while Dave offered his shield as a writing table. The referral was signed and sealed by the Baron, an official document that would help them gain access even if the city wasn't accepting new residents or had put other restrictions on groups of travelers. It would also help them along the way, as it could be used to prove that they were not bandits, only passing through a territory. Normally, such a document would be much more difficult to come by, but Baron Keith also knew that Biverlow was very close to the border, so there was a chance that the group would pass into Midfield and no longer be his problem. It was the small group that chose to remain behind that had his interest, especially that woman who had enchanted him with only a few words. That was an incredibly powerful skill, and possibly more useful as an innate magical ability than Dominic's infinite arcane blast. At least when they weren't under attack. Chapter 455, Just Mages. The group that had chosen to go didn't intend to wait even a moment longer, and they began to secure their packs and gather into traveling groups the moment that they had the notice. A few of them still waited to say goodbye to friends who had chosen to stay, but Dominic could see that the decision had caused some hard feelings, and the two groups were not really unified to begin with. He waited for the larger group to move out of easy earshot before he addressed the remaining group. All right, I can see that most of you have chosen to stay because this is a place of magic and non-humans, so we might as well start with a summary of skills. The young woman who had spoken the first time cleared her throat. I think that you already know my specialty. But in this group we have 3 garden witches, and the rest are failed acolytes from the Mage Tower. They've all got magic, but they were either suspected of non-human lineage and expelled, or they failed the advancement test after entry and couldn't advance. She explained. So, no techno-witches, wizards, or other magitech specialists. The young woman shook her head. No. There really aren't many of them in our part of the country, and they were well enough off that they didn't have to leave. I don't blame them. I didn't want to travel this far either. But I'm still in shock that so many of our people chose to leave when they saw the troll. Skipple isn't as rigid as Dagos. I thought that most of us would choose to stay. Dominic nodded, then shrugged. Well, they said at the start that most of the group has some magic, so they should be fine wherever they end up. This area looks like it has good farms. Is there a reason that everything is abandoned? She replied. Mostly just because we only recently returned. This is the site of Old Westover, and the population isn't as spread out as it was. So there are still farmhouses available, even though we've expanded the town to much larger than it used to be. We're working on industry and building magitech factories, along with a transport hub for the Merchants Guild. No matter what sort of work you need, you can likely find something here. Everyone is so busy these days, even in the rainy season, that just applying with experience might get you hired. You said that you had a specific job in mind for me. What was it? Dominic examined her more closely. She looked like she was in good shape. First off, does your ability work on women? She shook her head in denial, so Dominic continued. In that case, I would like to recommend you for Princess Alexis' Veiled Maid Force. They're primarily domestic staff, but also trained to defend the princess and will work as her representatives once they're more experienced. It's a respectable position, paid better than the average palace servant. What do you think? Is it something that you would be interested in? Slowly, the woman nodded. Becoming a servant for a princess was not on the career paths that she had planned for her life, but if it didn't work out, she knew that she could sweet-talk her way into having one of the noblemen stand up for her. Strangely, her ability didn't appear to work on the Duke. The bloodline of a dragonkin was a bit too bestial for her skills, which only worked on human males. Normally, that was not much of a restriction, as it meant nearly all men. But with him being the Duke and immune to her charms, there would be less suspicion about why she was referred. Are you close with the princess that you can make that offer? She asked. Oh, I forgot to mention that part. We're married. Princess Alexis, one of the Paladin twin princesses, is the Duchess of Westover. The small group that had stayed all smiled. That changed many things. A small duchy in the middle of nowhere might have some influence at the moment, but with a princess here, it would surely have much more favor from the king. How did you get that lucky? She muttered, forgetting that Dominic could hear her. I think that's the question that everyone wants to know. All I know is that I'm glad that I did. Really, most of the reason is just that the king wanted to leverage my title as a former prince of Wavemates to legitimize his claim on the territory, or at least that is the operating theory. The new arrivals accepted that reason easily enough. It made sense to them, as lands were often unified with a political marriage, and this territory had been claimed by Signia after the war, when they originally didn't have much of a claim to it, other than to punish Dagos for their aggression. However, with Dominic here, representing the original Wavemates bloodline, they had a legitimate reason to claim huge amounts of territory. Prince Fahad chuckled. He's just being modest. They're a perfectly matched pair. If the king hadn't arranged it, she might have run off and made a love match with him, somewhere out in the wilderness, killing ogres for fun. The mages smiled. So, that's how it is. We heard a lot about the Paladin princess, but we didn't know how true it was. Honestly, their reputations understate just how intense they can be. But it is working out well for the locals. With such capable nobles, even when Dagos sent an army of monsters to invade, there were only minor damages. You made the right choice settling here. Fahad insisted. Might I ask, what might your title be, sir? The woman with the magical voice asked. Oh, I am Crown Prince Fahad of Axbridge. I have an army here for trade negotiations at the moment. The look on the woman's face said that there was a good chance that she was going to pass out, or perhaps vomit. Possibly both. There's the right reaction. Oop, there she goes. I've got you. Chapter 456, The New Generation. Sheriff Nate arrived a few minutes later and escorted the new arrivals into town so they could find places to live, as none of the ones who stayed were farmers. One of the trolls came to take the siren mage, the girl with the magical voice, to Alexis, as her ability didn't work on the trolls, and that freed Dominic and Fahad to return to the airship factory, where the dwarves should have finished exploring. Well, what do you think of the setup? Did we miss anything important? Dominic asked once everyone was gathered. It looks like we've got everything to get started. The first few weeks won't be too hard. We're going to try to redesign the airship framework to be lighter and more efficient, using higher quality metals. Most of that will be transmutation work, which isn't an issue, as this Westover clay that you've provided is of excellent quality. Then, we will make a number of smaller-scale prototypes before we make a full-sized airship. We can extrapolate the changes in total weight from the blueprint, but only when we actually build it for the first time will we see if there are any construction issues with the design. Did you want to stay here while we work? Sounds good to me. Fahad, what do you want to do? The Axbridge prince sighed. Unfortunately, I have to get back to the meetings. There is about to be some progress between the negotiators, and I will have to be there to officially approve it. If you want to stay, I will let the princess know where you are. That would be perfect. I will report back tonight on our progress. Go, do what you have to do, and we will keep busy here getting everything ready for initial production. The more convincingly we can get the project started, the easier it will be to hide their identities from anyone who might be looking for them. Fahad nodded. I will make sure that everyone in the manor knows the right way to answer when anyone asks about the new airship program. To anyone outside the royal families, they are just what they seem, regular employees who traveled here with a caravan. Dominic joined the dwarves at a work table where they were sketching out designs for the new generation airship, as they had tentatively labeled it. First up, how large are we planning to make this airship? Somewhere near the size of a warship, with a lower hold 20 meters long and a total length twice that when inflated. The team leader asked. Dominic shook his head. No, I want to make a proper cargo airship. Forget naval vessel sizing. We are building the docks for it after we design the airship.
So we can make it big.
Truly large in dimensions, enough to hold an entire caravan worth of supplies. The dwarves looked at the hangar that had been built for the project. You can't seriously be thinking of making an airship 100 meters long? Dominic shrugged. I don't see why not. If we're making it out of an upgraded version of aluminum, we can make a semi-rigid airship frame instead of a balloon under netting like the primitive designs that hung a small ship underneath. I still like the design with a ship's hull underneath, and that will work amazingly if you're going to land on water to load and unload. Think big. We're going all out, and this will be usable for both military use and bulk freight. Nobody else is using this sort of integrated design, so we can blow all their minds. The dwarves smiled. You know, they're going to be terrified if we show up with a massive airship lined with cannons. Not only would it dwarf anything else in the sky, if we integrate the cargo hold with a structured lifting envelope, we won't have the sway at higher speeds. He began scribbling furiously. You see, like this? If we put the envelope in a lightweight frame, we protect it from damage and leaks, but we can also mount the engines to the envelope and eliminate the energy lost to the swaying. A solid structure can also be shaped into a more aerodynamic shape than the usual blob of gas. I think that the real advantage will be Magitech motors, though. Water for the steam boilers, coal, or oil fuel. Those add up fast and eat up almost all the cargo capacity of a conventional airship. Just doing away with those and replacing them with magic, we can gain back a huge amount of capacity. One of the other dwarves was calculating the lifting power and volume on a large piece of paper, using the rough oblong shape that they had sketched. With an average diameter of 30 meters and 100 meters long, we've got just over 70 tons total lifting capacity using helium. Subtract the weight of the airship itself, and we should be able to give it at least 50 tons of capacity. That is a bit ridiculous, but when you think of what we want to do with it, I would say that it's about right. Making helium with a spell is easy enough. Every airship captain can do that. Even on this scale, it won't be a big issue. So, the challenge will be to make a rigid structure light enough to maximize cargo capacity. Another agreed. And if we put a rudder and elevator at the back, instead of relying entirely on the propellers, we can get better directional stability in motion. Dominic smiled and brought out the blueprints for the bypass turbine. If we use magic to drive the turbine instead of steam, it will be harder on the crew, but I think that a duct turbine of this design would be a great improvement over the standard propeller. The dwarves looked over the dimensions and nodded, then began sketching it onto the rigid airship hull design. 4 fans, all adjustable, the rear rudders and elevators, a long cargo hold. Long but not tall so that we can spread the weight. We can do this. Chapter 457, Structural Plans. The first challenge is going to be the internal structure. Holding the balloon in place with ropes isn't going to work for this design. Gully, the self-appointed head of design, announced. Hollow tubes? Or is it better to do a half loop with lightning holes? One of the others asked. Let's design both. It's easier to build the model and put it on the scale than to calculate the weight savings. Dominic suggested. Gully laughed. Trust the dragonkin to have the practical answer. You would be a terrible researcher, but I like the way that you think. What should we start with? Just regular aluminum to see how extreme the construction methods need to be. One of the older dwarves suggested. That's not bad. Go for aluminum, with thicker hull plating and a double-layered gas envelope. That's peak safety procedures, even if it will hurt our cargo capacity. Gully agreed. If we're going to use them for the military as well as for reliable cargo, that will be important. They'll obviously be using defensive barriers, but you can't make it too easy to tear or puncture the envelope once the barrier is down. Dominic noted. The dwarfs nodded in agreement. There was an incident a few years back where a rock, a big flying monster, attacked airships in its territory and tore the containment.
Takes them right out of the sky.
That would never do in battle, and it won't take long for armies to learn to hook defenseless ships with a grapple to tear them to shreds.
Gully sighed.
Unfortunately, the only viable option that we have for a cover is rubberized silk. There isn't anything else that will both hold the gas and be light enough to be useful. A metal containment vessel is too heavy, even if we use some of the more advanced metals. So, an airship will never be a tank unless we're using a huge amount of magic to keep it aloft. And at that point, do we even call it an airship? That was an issue for durability.
But it was what it was.
Well, if we have enough weight available, we can work on something. But just having a frame with inner bladders and an outer bubble that isn't holding the primary helium source should be a good start. We will be able to lose a portion of the lift, and they will have to get past the frame to get the primary envelope.
One of the others suggested.
That was added to the design, and Dominic could see that the new airship was becoming a much more extensive engineering problem than the old ones had been. They should be even safer, though. With 3 sections, it would be harder for a cannonball to take them down, and they would be less likely to simply plummet from the air. A controlled crash was much more survivable. The structure of the airships was starting to become a coherent design, not just a basic concept. That meant that they could start making the construction blueprints for the framework. The dwarfs planned to lay out the parts to cut them to size instead of making jigs like they would for larger pieces. But the real challenge was making the thin tubing that would be used for the first design. If it was solid wire, it would be heavier than the representative design, and that would mess up their calculations. Even just trying to extrapolate a full-size design from the scale models was difficult, but if they weren't true to the design, it would be even worse. Fortunately for Dominic, the men were all skilled at their trades, and with experienced blacksmiths, they were not strangers to delicate work and precision tooling. While they work on the design blueprints, why don't we start on the magical portion? It will take a few days to get the final design done and get the models made.
One of the techno-wizards suggested.
That's a wonderful idea. What did you have in mind? Everyone complains that a full magical design will take too much skilled labor to be practical for sale, so it will have to be efficient and limited, but with the option to expand. Dominic agreed. That shouldn't be an issue. They'll need someone with at least a little skill to keep the orbs for the motors going, unless we're going to use boilers and steam turbines, which will limit range. Beyond that, I was thinking of just a few simple things. We can add wind magic to increase speed and lift, the combat spells for the military options, which I am told that you already know, and if we're feeling adventurous, we could use a levitation spell to reduce the weight of the cargo, so it would be volume limited and not mana limited. That might be beyond the average merchant, but an average merchant isn't buying a top-of-the-line next-generation airship. Those who can afford it can afford to hire a mage, and wouldn't you know it, a little birdie tells me that Wistover is training a whole school full of them. The dwarves laughed at the comment, and Dominic smiled back. I'm glad we're all on the same page. Having enough mages isn't just for inside the city, it's a job opportunity that will take them anywhere within the Cygnia's sphere of influence. So, we can make all the appropriate orbs and offer them as options for the purchasers of the airships. These large cargo hold-style airships will be able to do so much more than anything that came before them, and I honestly don't think that we will lose much by staying with a standard steam boiler setup for the turbine. Water creation spells built into the control room will take care of refueling, and steam vents to each turbine will be better for weight distribution. If we put larger amounts of weight outboard, it needs a stronger frame, and if we put magic out there, it needs ranged activation and maintenance. That will be the killer part. A ship this large will need at least 4 turbines for control and flight. That's a lot of maintenance, and it will drive away some customers. Dominic frowned. Then we design it for both. Offer the propeller design as the base model with the turbines as a higher speed option with associated costs for those willing to take the risk. What sort of speeds are we looking at? Or
Do you know yet?
The techno-wizards turned to Gully, the lead designer. If we can use levitation and wind magic, plus that turbine design you showed us, driven off a steam boiler, we should be up over 100 kilometers an hour, where the standard balloon and ship hull design is only good for about 30.
He insisted.
Now they were talking. Chapter 458. Faster deliveries. If we're going to have airships that fast, I think that we're going to be able to sell them even if the maintenance costs are higher. At 100 kilometers an hour, they could make Midfield to Signia City in under a day. They could reach most of the Axbridge cities in the same, or anywhere in the northeastern nations in under 24 hours. You're all from the Merchants Guild. You know the value we could offer if we could offer 30 or 50 tons of goods for next-day delivery anywhere in the region.
Dominic insisted.
The dwarves were silent as they did the mental math. Yeah, that sort of speed and weight should be right in our target range with a boiler setup and 4 steam turbines. If the structure works out, we should have the thrust to actually push it closer to 150 kilometers an hour, but it'll all depend on how much stress the materials can take. The outer cloth, the rubberized silk to keep the helium in, is going to be the limiting factor. But once we've got the models built, we will have a better idea. I'm tempted to go for helium outer with a hydrogen envelope inner buoyancy for more cargo capacity, but you know how that goes.
One of the others laughed.
Boom. That's how that goes. It's a great theory, but everyone is too paranoid of explosions to go for it again. It's definitely worth the 10% loss in capacity to stay away from that sort of bad press. During the early days of airship development, simply getting ships to fly was the focus, and they had tried everything from baskets under hot air balloons with a fan to actual ships under a hydrogen envelope. That had worked, but there had been a number of catastrophic failures when they were attacked, or something went wrong with the engines and a spark caused the hydrogen to catch fire. While it had much more buoyancy than helium, it simply wasn't in any way safe for daily use. Well, just adding a levitation spell would be a big start to making the new airships exactly what buyers want. A large cargo hold that they can fill to the brim with anything but the most dense of goods. If we're making the ship 100 meters long, we could reasonably design it to have 40 meters of cargo space, roughly equal to 4 caravan trucks. I don't know the logistics of the rest of the continent, but around here, that's a pretty standard convoy, so it should be enough to keep the bills paid.
Dominic agreed.
The techno-wizards nodded. It's not going to be cheap, but they can hire fewer guards, just a few cannoneers. That will save ongoing expenses to help pay for the techno-wizard or mage that will keep it going at full output. Perhaps once we start making them money directly, they'll start giving us some damned respect. The others grumbled an assortment of annoyed responses. They had all dealt with plenty of arrogance and condescension in their past, and despite their skills being highly valued, they were not treated as well as other professionals at their pay grade would have been. And that was a large part of the reason they had chosen to come to Westover. The other half being that every other option they had come across would involve them either living in hiding or in a nation that hadn't even begun to embrace advanced technology at all. For the techno-wizards, that would have been pure torture. Everyone worked in silence for a while, and Dominic took careful notes as the techno-wizards laid out the designs for the various Magitech orbs that they would use to keep the airships aloft. The basics would be just the water creation and fire spells for the steam boiler. Those were both ones that Dominic already knew, and ones that he had a spell gem for. But after that was the levitation Magitech orb, which the dwarves called a load-bearing orb, due to the practical use of the spell. It wouldn't fully lift 100 tons of airship, but nobody expected it to. It just had to be cast on the helium envelope, and it would increase the lift over a large area. Apparently that was much easier than trying to lift a smaller heavy object, but Dominic wasn't 100% confident in the application. It wasn't a spell that was normally used on airships, so it was very much an experimental practice. But the theory sounded solid. Helium was very light to begin with, so the spell only had to apply a small upward force on a huge area, much like sweeping up leaves. Then the extra lift from the spell would be applied to the structure by the helium, instead of trying to lift the structure directly. That should allow them to scale the lift much more smoothly and use only as much mana as they could spare, or as much as they needed to get the lift required for an overloaded airship. It could be an upcharge for heavy cargo, you know? Charge them to keep the spell active, so they can load heavier stuff in the ship. Gully joked as the two teams worked on their designs. The extra lift would let them fly higher, where the air was thinner and the resistance lower, so they could fly faster. But it was a trade-off, as they still needed to load the ship, and a cargo airship didn't go anywhere empty. Compared to that, the wind magic was pure luxury. Yes, it could be used to lift the ship, but it was primarily used to propel it forward. With so much wind resistance on the airship, a good tailwind or headwind would make a massive difference in performance, and the ground-level winds tended to be worse than they were a little further off the ground. Plus, if they were further up, they were harder to ambush, as Signia had learned during the war. Are we going to arm the merchant vessels heavily? It seems like a waste to put more than a few cannons on them.
Gully asked.
I was thinking 2 cannons per side. I have the plans for the self-loading cannon orbs that Signia developed during the war, and we can use them to remove the need for munitions, as long as there is a qualified techno-wizard on board.
Dominic suggested.
That will be wonderful. The Merchants Guild has been clamoring to get their hands on that spell for some time now. Chapter 459. Design Issues. As Dominic looked at the design, he realized that the extremely wide oval design would actually be terrible for flight. Making it longer and narrower would be so much better, but as he read the math on the sheet, it became clear that the total volume relied much more on the width than the length. Narrowing the design even a little would cost them a huge amount of volume, compared to the extra speed they might get from the improved shape. But cargo ships were also usually fat and ponderous, designed to hold as much as possible, not to move as efficiently as possible through the water. Unless we do something about the shape, this thing is going to fly like a Davian cargo caravel. Dominic joked, referring to the infamously wide and flat-bottomed cargo ships that traveled the southeastern seas. Not much way around that, if we're not going to load them up with magic. Gully noted. Still, it's a shame. Perhaps we should introduce this one first as the epitome of cargo capacity, then work on a faster one with more magic involved for the army. One of the other dwarves suggested. That's a wonderful plan. Nobody moves much in the rain, so we've got some time to get an airship up. If this one does what we want it to, even just holds the weight at a lower speed, it will provide the funding for everything else. Dominic suggested. He could fund this on his own and claim the products for the duchy if he wanted. But Dominic was a big fan of productive businesses, and having everything pay for itself made the duchy run so much more smoothly. It would also help with relations if he didn't try to cut the guilds out of the process. They might not have a monopoly on shipping, but they would not be happy about hiring airships instead of owning them, even if they struggled to get the crews to run them. We could do more than just cannon ships for the army. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's get the cargo airships in the sky first, then we can work on the escorts and fleet ships to protect them. It might sound cruel, but if we send them out a couple of times and see who bites at the bait and how, we will know more about what we need to protect them. The elder techno-wizard insisted. Excellent point. The market for commercial airships can't be so big that we will need to make more than one at a time, right? So, we will have time for side projects. One of the others suggested, which made Dominic and the older men laugh. You misunderstand the nature of the market. Once we get something that will remove bad roads and monster attacks from the equation, many won't care how much it costs to buy one. They will want an airship. Dominic explained. The younger dwarf looked skeptical, but the confidence of the others convinced him that there really was a chance that just making one type of new airship would be enough to keep them busy for years. They had been primarily researchers at home, though they weren't working on any major projects of this scale. But the questions didn't stop them from working, and over the course of the next few hours, they not only had a batch of Magitech orbs created, they also had a basic and functional airship model built. Gods, that thing is ugly. I mean, it's the right size for what we want, but... Dominic sighed. What if we drop it on the floor? Give it a bit of an egg shape like a glider wing, so it provides its own lift as it moves. One of the men suggested. First, get it on the scale. What does it weigh? If we're close to the desired weight, we can start working on design refinements. Gully insisted. Calculating the structural strength of the larger scale materials and the associated weight was still not simple math, but in under an hour after the model was on the scale, there was a consensus that the new airship design would be within the range of acceptable weights for their project. With the inner balance bladders partially inflated, the airship should still be able to lift 30 tons off the ground, and with them completely deflated, it should be able to fly at 1,000 meters with the same amount of weight. It wouldn't make it over a mountain range like that, but there were no real mountains in the region, other than in Western Axbridge. Well, we will need to cut the cargo capacity by a third to go over the mountains, but we should have reasonable climb rates with 30 tons of cargo and no magical assistance, or thrust-assisted liftoff with 50 tons and some forward momentum. If we do redesign the envelope to have a flatter bottom and a wider profile, it will be much easier to get the excess weight aloft even from a higher altitude. The compressed air bladders should be sufficient without adjusting ballast, but a larger water tank for the boilers will give us some leeway if we rate it for 30 tons unpowered. Now, we need to work on the magical assistance. It's easy enough to put a large rock on the scale and measure the input needed to reduce the weight to the degree we want. In fact, we've already got charts for that, since the cargo orb isn't a new product, just an obscure one. Gully announced. Dominic shook his head in dismay. How much magitech is out there, hidden in nations that don't appreciate it and forgotten? That sort of orb should be everywhere in Signia, but I've never seen one in use, even when we're routinely overloading cargo tractors and trailers running over muddy terrain. The dwarf stared at him for a moment before Gully spoke. You want to use orbs on merchant caravans to get them unstuck from the mud? I really don't see why not. Do you know how much of a pain it is to get them out of the mud? Hooking up tow ropes and such? Just lighten the cargo until the traction is more than the resistance. Chapter 460. Frivolous Magic. The thought of using magic in such a frivolous way was shocking to the engineers. Magic was powerful and sacred. It was for grand projects, the betterment of society, removing the monstrous threats to humanity, and the dragon had a point. There really wasn't any reason not to just give tow truck drivers magitech to lift stuck vehicles out of the mud other than the mage's pride. That's actually a good idea as well. Tow trucks to bring back broken-down carriages and tractors, so they can be repaired in the shop instead of sending a mechanic into the fields to do it. It would save trips and time. Gully agreed. I will recommend it to the tractor maker and the shops at the cargo docks. They will be the ones that need one, and they could just fit a crane to an existing piece of equipment, I think.
Dominic suggested.
Or a service truck. You could load up a specialty truck with a crane, a forge, spare parts and such, then send out a team of repair technicians. It would be glorious. And it would let us repair the tractors right where they were, without the need for mechanics in every barony. There are only a couple here, according to the guild, but they say that Wistover is supposed to get 20 more barons once the war is settled. That's a lot of territory to cover, and a lot of specialized training to keep all the equipment running. No blacksmith wants that sort of hassle, going to make small repairs, or having broken down equipment dropped in his yard. Not when he could send an apprentice with a truck to do the work. Dominic laughed at the thought. He had been that apprentice once, sent along on a trip with a merchant caravan so that he could fix what inevitably broke. But now they were sending magitech tractors to every field, so they would need more repair workers. This really is a vicious cycle. The more we improve things, the more trained workers we need. But the more trained workers we have, the more stuff we need for the lifestyle they can afford, which means we need more skilled workers to produce what the last batch wants to buy. A good problem to have, I suppose. Yet still a problem. Gully sighed as he looked at the factory space, and then the design in front of him. Gentlemen, we have one issue. The factory is not large enough for the design that we have. It's a truly cavernous warehouse, but this design, scaled up to the level where we can confidently carry 50 tons without magic, is too large to fit. Everyone frowned as they stared at the room. How had they overlooked that? Well, we can make a slightly smaller one first, or reshape it. The warehouse is long enough, it's just not tall enough. Or we can skip on the non-magical version. No, that's a safety feature, so it doesn't crash immediately if the mage has a medical issue. That wouldn't be good for our reputation. Back to the drawing board, gentlemen. Let's make a design that fits in the factory. The dwarves were laughing as they added a box for the factory to the designs, and then began the work of redesigning the airship without losing significant volume. Flat on the bottom, oval in shape with a narrower top. That was the best compromise to fit in the warehouse as they made it, and it would generate lift as it was flying, which would make it easier to control. In theory, this was an improvement on the original, and they added enlarged rear control surfaces, as well as fully adjustable thrusters mounted to the sides of the lower cargo area, where they would be easily accessible instead of the rear of the ship, which had been the standard to avoid hitting anything expensive when they were loading. This is going to be a monstrosity of a vehicle when we finish. Gully sighed, then drew a new draft which put 2 of the thrusters on the lower corners of the envelope and 1 at the back of the cargo compartment. That was better, and it put the line of thrust further from the center, for easier maneuvering. For an airship this size and weight, it would be slow to change directions, even with the largest of control surfaces, and the location of the thrust was as important as the amount of thrust that you could generate. The one at the rear of the hold would be the primary forward thruster, and it was a stationary mount, while the other 2 could swivel to face whatever direction they needed, even straight down, to force the airship onto the ground while it was unloaded, so sudden shifts in weight didn't strain the mooring lines. Do you think that's enough? Or should we make the rear of the cabin thruster variable as well? One of the engineers asked. Gully gestured to a set of airflow notes on a discarded page. It should be fine. In motion, there is plenty of airflow both from movement and the thrusters, so it won't struggle to stay on the ground. However, if we put chambers in the ballast compartment, we can adjust back and forth as they unload the airship. What had been a simple concept was quickly turning into a highly developed piece of Magitech technology. Compared to the airships that came before it, this one would be a true marvel of engineering, and even the double containment for the helium was all about safety and redundancy. Now, they just needed to make another model, and then perhaps bring it to Rill so that he could confer with the other senior members of the Merchants Guild about the design specifications before the first unit was built. Having the right customer input could make or break the project when it came time to spread them across the continent. And they would spread, given the speed and capacity that they should have. They might even be capable of leaving the continent entirely to do trans-ocean shipping much faster than a standard cargo caravel or merchant cutter.